The vast corridors of the Galactic Academy gleamed under the artificial sunlight, the metallic floors humming with energy as cadets from across the known universe hurried to their respective training sessions. Among the towering, exotic forms of the alien recruits, scaled warriors from the Draknar Dominion, crystalline scholars from the Vrix conglomerate, and towering insectoid strategists from the Koveth swarm, one figure stood conspicuously out of place. Private Ethan Cross, the only human in the entire academy, felt the weight of every curious and dismissive gaze as he walked into the combat training hall. The sheer variety of alien physiology around him made him appear almost comically weak. Some recruits had hardened exoskeletons that could repel energy blasts, others possessed musculature that could crush stone, and a few even had psionic abilities that allowed them to predict enemy movements. The instructor, a massive 8-limbed veteran from the warlike Ralkath species, took one glance at Ethan and let out a guttural sound that could only be interpreted as amusement. The rest of the recruits followed suit, a ripple of laughter and murmured mockery spreading through the group. Ethan ignored them. He had been here before. Every human assigned to the Galactic Academy faced the same skepticism. Humans were physically unremarkable compared to most species in the galaxy, lacking the brute strength of the Tharn, the speed of the Zedrak, or the natural weaponry of the Silicari. Yet, Earth had made a name for itself in the stars not by being the strongest, but by being the most unpredictable. Ethan was here to prove that once again. Cadet Cross, the instructor rumbled, stepping forward. Your race is new to our training programs. I assume you understand that combat at this level is not for the fragile. Ethan offered a casual shrug. I understand. Then let us begin, the instructor growled, turning to the group. A simple demonstration. Cadet Cross versus. He surveyed the recruits before his eyes landed on a massive Tharn warrior. Dreltak. A wave of approval spread through the crowd. The Tharn were a species of 8-foot-tall, heavily muscled warriors bred for battle, their skin thick as armor plating. Dreltak grinned, baring jagged teeth, and stepped forward, flexing his clawed hands. This is ridiculous, one of the crystalline Vrix muttered. The human will be crushed in seconds. Ethan suppressed a smirk. That was exactly what they thought last time. The combat ring was activated, and the force barriers around it flickered to life, ensuring that no stray blows would harm the audience. Ethan stepped inside, rolling his shoulders as he faced his opponent. Dreltak cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing ominously through the chamber. You may begin, the instructor announced. Dreltak wasted no time. He lunged, swinging a fist the size of Ethan's head straight at him. But before the blow could land, Ethan sidestepped effortlessly, ducking under the incoming strike with precision. The Tharn stumbled forward, momentarily off balance, and Ethan used that split second to drive a sharp elbow into the back of his knee. The giant warrior let out a grunt, but it was more from surprise than pain. The crowd murmured. Most fights with the Tharn ended in a single punch. The human had dodged. Dreltak recovered quickly, twisting around and launching a brutal kick. Ethan, however, was already moving. He twisted away, using the momentum of the Tharn's own attack to guide him into a smooth roll. He came up on the balls of his feet, hands loose and ready. Dreltak, growing frustrated, came at him again, this time with calculated aggression. Ethan continued to evade, letting the warrior's strength work against him. The Tharn was powerful, but he wasn't used to opponents who refused to meet him with brute force. After several more failed attempts to land a hit, Dreltak was panting. His endurance was legendary, but no one had ever made him throw this many strikes without consequence. The whispers from the audience grew louder. Ethan smiled slightly. It was time to go on the offensive. The next time Dreltak swung, Ethan didn't dodge completely. Instead, he redirected the force, guiding the punch just past his shoulder and using his opponent's own momentum to pull him forward. As Dreltak stumbled, Ethan struck with rapid, precise blows targeting nerve clusters, weak joints, and pressure points that few outside of human combat schools even knew existed. Within seconds, Dreltak found himself on his knees, his muscles spasming as Ethan's final strike landed at the base of his neck. He gasped, unable to move properly. The entire hall was silent. Ethan stepped back, breathing evenly. Yield. Dreltak, his pride shattered, let out a low growl but managed to nod. The instructor's eyes narrowed, and he walked forward. Interesting. He turned to the class. What you have witnessed is an example of human adaptability. They lack raw power, but they compensate with speed, strategy, and efficiency. Combat is not always about strength alone. The recruits muttered amongst themselves. Some were in awe, others in disbelief. The crystalline Vrix scholar from before studied Ethan intently, as if reassessing an equation that suddenly didn't add up. As the session concluded, Ethan felt the weight of new stares on him, not of mockery, but of intrigue. He had taken the first step toward proving that humans were not to be underestimated. Yet, this was only the beginning. He knew the real challenge was yet to come. As he exited the training hall, he caught a glimpse of the instructor speaking quietly to a figure in the shadows. Ethan didn't recognize the species, but he recognized the intent. Someone was watching him closely, and in this academy, that was rarely a good thing. The tension in the Galactic Academy was shifting. After Ethan's surprising display against Dreltak, the skeptical murmurs had turned into intrigued whispers. He had proven himself, but that didn't mean his battles were over. If anything, he had painted a target on his back. The lesson of human adaptability had been learned, but there were still those who refused to believe that his victory had been anything more than a fluke. And Ethan knew it. The following week, he found himself summoned to an advanced combat simulation. Not a typical exercise, but a high-stakes test designed to push recruits to their limits. The moment he entered the training hall, he saw that this wasn't a mere sparring match, this was a proving ground. The instructor loomed over the assembled recruits, his expression unreadable as he motioned for Ethan to step forward. Today's exercise, the instructor announced, his gravelly voice echoing, will test your ability to survive against superior opponents. This will be a 3-on-1 scenario. A murmur rippled through the crowd. 3 against 1? That was a death sentence, even for the best of them. But Ethan simply nodded, stepping into the ring without hesitation. He had expected something like this. His opponents stepped forward. A Vrix tactician, a Koveth hunter, and another Tharn warrior, this one even larger than Dreltak. Their expressions were cold, calculating. There was no doubt in Ethan's mind that they were here to send a message. The instructor raised his hand. Begin. The moment the word was spoken, the 3 aliens moved as one. The Koveth lunged first, its blade-like appendages flashing under the artificial lighting. Ethan ducked, narrowly avoiding a strike that would have torn through his torso. He twisted away just as the Vrix tactician launched a psionic assault, a ripple of force distorting the air around him. Ethan barely managed to pivot out of range, his instincts screaming. Then came the Tharn. A fist the size of a boulder came crashing down, and Ethan barely managed to evade, rolling to the side just in time to avoid a direct hit. He had expected this much. They weren't holding back, and neither could he. He used their own tactics against them. Instead of taking them head-on, he led them into each other's attacks. A perfectly timed sidestep sent the Koveth into the path of the Tharn's strike. A quick pivot put the Vrix directly into the line of fire of a stray energy pulse. They were fast, but Ethan was faster mentally if not physically. He read their movements, their tells, their tendencies. He had studied every species in this room. He knew how they thought. For every advantage they had in strength or speed, he countered with misdirection, precision, and adaptability. The Koveth was an instinctual fighter, reliant on sheer aggression. Ethan kept it off balance, forcing it to overcommit. The Vrix was calculating, always predicting the next step. Ethan broke the pattern, shifting his attacks erratically. And the Tharn? The Tharn relied on endurance, expecting to outlast its opponents. But Ethan never gave it a clear target. Minutes passed, and what had started as an unfair match had become something else entirely. The crowd had grown silent, watching as Ethan systematically dismantled the attack formations. The 3 warriors had started the fight as a unified force, but now they hesitated, unsure. He had turned them against their own instincts. Then, with a final calculated strike, he dropped the Koveth to the ground, using its own momentum against it. The Vrix fell next, its psionic abilities nullified by sheer unpredictability. The Tharn, alone now, hesitated. Ethan stared up at the towering warrior. Yield! The Tharn's muscles tensed. For a second, it looked like it would charge. But then it exhaled heavily and stepped back, nodding. Yield. The moment the match was declared over, the silence in the room shattered into an explosion of whispers and stunned murmurs. The instructor stepped forward, his expression still unreadable, but his voice carried an air of finality. Lesson learned. Ethan stepped out of the ring, breathing heavily but standing tall. He had made his point. But even as he felt the shift in perception, he knew that this was just another step in a much larger game. Someone, somewhere, had taken notice. And they weren't going to let this go unanswered. Ethan barely had time to revel in his victory before the true test began. The match had been a statement, a declaration that humanity was not to be underestimated, but that also meant his enemies were no longer just skeptical recruits. Someone had been watching, and now, the real challenge was coming. Word spread through the Galactic Academy like wildfire. The human had not only survived but had outmaneuvered some of the best fighters in training. Some cadets watched him with newfound respect, others with quiet unease, but a select few viewed him with something far more dangerous: hostility. Ethan had disrupted the balance, and those who prided themselves on their dominance weren't about to let that go unchallenged. Days later, Ethan was summoned again, but this time, it wasn't to a training match. Instead, he was escorted by two silent, armored figures into the depths of the academy, where the air was colder, the halls quieter, and the stakes much, much higher. He was led into a vast chamber, where the academy's high-ranking officials sat in observation, their expressions unreadable. At the center of the room stood a combat ring, and waiting inside was someone Ethan had never expected to face. General Zerval. A veteran of countless interstellar conflicts, feared even among the elite. A warrior who had fought and won against species that had wiped out entire worlds. He was not here to train Ethan. He was here to break him. Ethan swallowed hard, but he did not waver. He stepped into the ring, knowing that this wasn't just a fight. This was a reckoning. The moment the match was announced, Zerval attacked. There was no testing, no sizing up, just immediate, overwhelming force. Ethan barely dodged the first strike, a crushing blow that cracked the ground where he had stood. He knew instantly, Zerval wasn't playing by the Academy's training rules. This was a fight to destroy him. Ethan was fast, but the general was faster. Every move Ethan made was countered before it fully formed. Every attempt to gain ground was crushed by the sheer experience and precision of his opponent. He had faced tough fighters before, but Zerval was something else entirely. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Every strike was designed to end the fight instantly. For the first time, Ethan felt true desperation. He had fought smarter, not harder, against previous opponents, but this was different. Zerval had seen every trick, countered every strategy. And worst of all, he didn't tire. A brutal strike sent Ethan skidding across the ring, his ribs aching from the impact. Blood dripped from his lip as he forced himself back to his feet, breathing hard. The room was silent, watching, waiting for the inevitable conclusion. But Ethan wasn't finished yet. He took a deep breath, focusing. He had spent the entire fight reacting, trying to survive. But survival wasn't enough. He had to turn the fight on its head. He had to do what humans did best, adapt. He watched Zerval's stance, noting the tiny shifts in weight, the micro-movements before each attack. He could see it now, patterns, rhythms, slight hesitations before the veteran struck. It wasn't much, but it was something. Zerval moved in again, but this time, Ethan met him differently. Instead of dodging, he redirected. Instead of reacting, he anticipated. He didn't try to overpower the general, he used his own force against him, letting Zerval's strength become his weakness. For the first time in the match, Zerval faltered. Only slightly, but it was enough. Ethan pressed the advantage, weaving around attacks and countering in ways that shouldn't have been possible. He wasn't fighting like the other cadets. He wasn't even fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like something else entirely, something unpredictable, something chaotic. Something human. The match stretched on, the energy in the room shifting. Zerval's attacks remained deadly, but now, there was something new in his expression: curiosity. He had expected a quick, decisive victory, but what he had received was an opponent who refused to stay beaten. An opponent who learned, who evolved, who turned disadvantage into opportunity. Ethan saw his chance and took it. A perfectly timed maneuver sent Zerval off balance for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Ethan struck with everything he had, targeting the general's most vulnerable point. It wasn't a conventional move, but that was the point. He wasn't bound by tradition, by the limitations of expectation. Zerval stumbled back. Just once. Just for a moment. Then the fight was over. The room was deathly silent as Ethan stood there, panting, blooded but unbroken. Zerval straightened, regarding him with an expression that was unreadable. Then, slowly, the general gave a single nod. Respect. Ethan had survived. More than that, he had won something far greater than a fight. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching. The echoes of Ethan's battle with General Zerval reverberated through the Galactic Academy for days. Every cadet, instructor, and official had witnessed the impossible: a human standing against a warrior known for his unrivaled combat prowess. Yet, it was not just victory that had shaken the academy, but how Ethan had achieved it. He had not overpowered Zerval. He had adapted, endured, and outmaneuvered him, proving that humans were more than what the galaxy had assumed. But Ethan knew it was not over. His victories had drawn attention, and not all of it was welcome. As he walked through the halls, he could feel the weight of countless eyes on him, some filled with admiration, others with resentment. He had disrupted the hierarchy, and there would always be those who sought to restore it. But Ethan had come too far to let fear control him. It was on the final night of his training cycle that he was summoned once again. This time, it was not to the combat ring, nor a war room. He found himself in a private chamber, seated across from the highest-ranking officials of the academy. Among them was Zerval, his piercing gaze fixed on Ethan with something that resembled curiosity. "Human," one of the officials finally spoke, his voice measured. "You have defied expectations, shattered assumptions. And now, we must decide what to do with you." Ethan sat upright, meeting their gazes. "I didn't come here to defy anything. I came to learn, to prove that humanity belongs among the best." Zerval leaned forward slightly. "And that you have done." His voice was steady, unreadable. "But there is more to strength than fighting. Tell me, human, what have you learned from your time here?" Ethan exhaled, choosing his words carefully. "I've learned that strength isn't about size or power. It's about knowing your weaknesses and turning them into strengths. It's about adapting, thinking beyond the obvious. And most importantly, it's about understanding your opponent, not just their techniques, but their motivations, their fears, their limits." A brief silence filled the chamber before one of the crystalline Vrix officials nodded. "Interesting." Zerval remained quiet for a moment before finally speaking. "There are those who will resist change, who will see your rise as an insult rather than an achievement. But evolution does not wait for permission." He met Ethan's gaze firmly. "You have earned my respect. But respect alone is not enough. What will you do with it?" Ethan knew this was the true test: not combat, not endurance, but what came after. He had earned a place here, but it was up to him to decide what to do with it. He could fight endlessly to prove humanity's worth, or he could do something greater. "I'll teach," he said, his voice resolute. "I'll show others, human or otherwise, what I've learned. Not just how to fight, but how to think, how to adapt. The galaxy isn't just about who's the strongest. It's about who's willing to change." A slow smile crept across Zerval's face, a rare sight indeed. "Then you are ready." Ethan stood, realizing that his journey had not ended, it had only just begun. He had come to prove something to the galaxy, but in the end, he had proven something to himself. Strength wasn't about raw power. It was about resilience, intelligence, and the courage to challenge the unknown. As he stepped out into the vast corridors of the academy, the future stretched before him, uncertain yet full of possibilities. Humanity had taken its first step into the greater galaxy, and Ethan Cross had made sure they would never be ignored again. The lesson was clear: True strength is not about domination, but adaptation. And those who fail to adapt will always be left behind. And so, with newfound purpose, Ethan walked forward not as a soldier, not as a mere recruit, but as something far more important. A pioneer.